Today we are talking about Kona and your experience
Kona.
of living there. How long were you living in Kona for?
Well, my parents were there for probably about 2.5 years or so. Um, my total time was just breaks from school.
And
And I don't know exactly how many months that was, but it was, 6 or 8 months or something like that total. When I first went over, I was 19. And by the time they left, I was about 21
and what
or
brought
so.
you there in the first place? Or your parents there?
Well, my dad had this friend that had been his friend that he met in the military during World War II. And his name is Dick Wallace. And my dad and Dick had always wanted to go into business together because my dad was a flooring contractor and Dick was a general contractor and built homes. But they always had this dream of going into business together. So it came a time that they bid together on a job to build a condominium over in Kona. They created their little company and they went over to build that condominium, and
Hmm.
that's what took them there.
And Kona's on the big island of Hawaii, right?
Yep,
So what was your
yep,
first impression? Was that your first time that you were there?
yes. It was the first time I'd been there, and if I remember right, we maybe flew into Honolulu and then had to take a. In fact, I know we did. We had to fly into Honolulu and then take another plane over to Kona. Because like we flew over on United and then had to pick up Hawaiian Airlines or Aloha Airlines to get over to the outer islands. And because the airports weren't that big back then. But I remember getting off the plane and immediately just being hit by the heat and humidity.
Because you were there in the summer then?
Yeah. Well, it's the same year round. The temperature doesn't change more than a couple of degrees all year round, and the humidity is the same. Um, but the days get shorter and longer, just like they do everywhere else. But the temperature doesn't change. And so, if I would have gone in June or January, it would have been the same as far as heat. But it was a good feeling because it wasn't overwhelming heat. It just was very gentle and humid, and of course had fragrance to it.
Yes, the
And
magical of Hawaii.
yep, and it's something that it's pretty hard to explain. But one of the things that I remember most from being in Hawaii were the smells, and it's amazing how that sticks in your brain. But it's the smells are great, because I could always, no matter where I was, smell the sea, which you know what the ocean smells like, and some plumeria in the air, and depending on where you were, maybe the smell of the lanterns that were burning, with the oil in them, and those things combined create quite a strong memory of Hawaii. And I loved it. I loved that whole thing with the smells.
Alrighty. So when you lived in Kona, what was your house like? What was the surrounding area like? Tell me all about that.
Well, we had a nice house in Kona, and it was up the mountain because Kona is built kind of on a mountain. Everything's volcanic. And so, right down by the ocean, is where the main town is, but the houses and stuff, a lot were up. And we lived up the mountain, and we called it Halualoa Road, but I'm not sure that's really what it was called. But we lived up there, and it took a few minutes to drive to get from up where we lived up to the house. And this is a picture of the house. And the house was basically a two-story house, and the upper part here is where we lived, and then the lower part was an apartment where some of the guys would live. And but my roommate and I, uh, we had a bedroom that we called the pit, and we called it the pit because it to get to it, you would open a little bifold door in the kitchen that was just a couple feet square, and and you can see if you look there how the ladder type thing comes down at a pretty sharp angle. And so we had to go up and down that like it was a ladder, not stairs by any means. And so that was always fun. But one thing that happened that was really funny was one morning I woke up and I was sleeping with my face to the wall. and about 2 inches from my nose was a great big spider, the ones that we call housemaids. And they actually, when their legs were out and everything, they're about the size of your hand. Even though they were more like a great big daddy long leg, the bodies were smaller, but they had really long legs. They were big and they would jump. And and they were so creepy because they'd jump right at you. They seemed to know what would terrify people. And one morning I woke up and there was one right in front of my face. And so, of course, I let out a scream. And then Jan and I were both trying to get out of the pit, and we were fighting each other to get up that ladder. And the spider didn't eat us, so we survived that. But you see in this picture too how it says the red pants thing sitting there. Um, that was a bar and a grill type thing. It was a little restaurant that my parents would go to really often. It was just a little local place down on Ali'i Drive, and it was a hangout for the local people. And that was one of their advertising things was that. And a little side note that I think is funny is I went back to Kona many years later, and I was thinking about the Red Pants Saloon, and I was talking to one of the people that worked there, and I said, I really wanted to figure out what happened to the red pants, and I know it was right around here somewhere, but where did it go? And they kind of smiled and they said, you're sitting in the red pants.
Whoa.
And so the little place where we were stopped to have lunch turned out to actually be the Red Pants Saloon. And so that was pretty fun. Oh, that was the view off of our lanai. And it was always cloudy. So, partly this is not a great picture because it's a very old Polaroid, but we had a telescope up there. And on a clear day, we could see down to the ocean really nicely and see things really great through the telescope. So that was cool. That was really fun. And this is kind of the walkway going up to the house. I can't remember exactly what it was like, but that what you see there that's red was the door. And I'm not sure if that's the one that went into the apartment or if that was the one that would go actually into the house. And we had a lanai also on the back of the house, and that's where some of the working guys, they would cut down big stalks of bananas and they'd hang them out there on that lanai. And so whenever we wanted bananas, we just would go out and get them off the big stalk of bananas. And so that was cool. So all that was really fun stuff.
And
But
what was your favorite part of your home, would you say?
of the house, probably, I would say honestly, even though it was a dump, was the pit because it was most memorable.
Is that where you lived mainly then with your roommate?
Yeah, that was our bedroom, but we lived up in the upper part of the house. My roommate actually was my dad's partner's daughter. So there were two families living in the house. My parents had a bedroom, her parents had a bedroom, her brother stayed down in the apartment with the other guys, and Jan and I had the pit. So it was just basically two families living there, and that was always interesting. I didn't know any actual neighbors up there, but I knew a lot of people in town. And I would become friends with them just through always being down in town. And my mom always said that I should have been the mayor of Kona because I knew everybody and would talk to everybody. And it always astounded her that I knew so many people. But I met him either through, I worked at a camera shop and I worked at a restaurant and just hung out and just got to know a lot of people. And most of the locals weren't white. And the only white people I really knew were the people that were working there. And pretty much everybody else was locals. And so they were, you know, some sort of Pacific Islander or Japanese. Yeah.
Do you have any memorable people that off the top of your brain of like,
Oh,
oh, like this person stood out?
yeah, there were a lot that stood out. One that stood out the most would have been my boss at the camera shop where I worked. And it was called Jim Joe's Kona Camera Shop. And the people that owned it were Jim and Joanne Garden was their name. And Joanne was really a neat lady. And she was good to me. She really was. And she appreciated the fact that I cared and that I tried to do a good job at the camera shop and would go the extra mile. And so she treated me really well. And so she's a real memorable character. And then there were other locals, just locals that I met. And I really liked them. But you got to realize too, this was in the late 60s. And so there was a whole different racial element back then. And so my dad, and having been in World War II, held a lot of prejudices, which was real unfortunate, but that's just the way it was. And if I tried to go on a date with anybody who was a local, he really would be upset. So most of the guys that I dated, I had to do it sneaky.
Discreetly.
Yeah, because my dad would get mad. And I did date one local guy, a couple local guys actually, but I mean, not locals, I meant to say white guys, but they were local. And dad didn't seem to have a problem with them, but they were probably the most unsavory ones of the bunch. The local kids were always really pretty good kids.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, and you told me a little bit about working at Jim Joe's.
Hmm.
What other
My other
jobs?
job was I worked at a little restaurant or cafe at a little dumpy motel that was called the Kona Sunset, and the restaurant was called the Kona Sunset Lanai. And in this picture right here, those are the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Schnebley, and they were pretty nice people. But I wasn't very good at that job because it was just a lot to remember, and I was a little scatterbrained at the time, and so I wasn't their best employee, that's for sure. But I tried, and it was hard to get there at 5 o'clock in the morning when I'd been hanging out late at night. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what the restaurant actually looked like. That's my roommate Jan, and serving somebody. We both worked there, and we had a blast. We really did it, and that's how I knew so many people. Really, was so many people would come in there for breakfast, and I only ever worked the breakfast shift because I worked at the camera shop in the afternoon and evening, and so but I'd get to know a lot of people that would come into the Kona Sunset Lanai for breakfast.
And how old were you when you were
Oh, I
working these
was
jobs?
probably 19 at that time. It was my first summer there. That was fun though. That was fun.
So tell me about some of your favorite spots when you were at Kona. Like what did you do for fun when you had work off or anything of that sort?
Well, probably the thing we did the most is hang out at the beach. I was not a swimmer. I don't know how to swim. I didn't then. And so I wasn't comfortable getting out way out into the ocean. And one place I liked to go into, in particular, to lay out to try to get sun was over at the Kona Hilton. And they had a little man made lagoon that they created. And it was fun for me because it was fairly shallow and I didn't have to worry about knowing how to swim to play around in there. And so I hung out there a lot. And we also would go to down the road a ways to a place that was called the Magic Sands Beach. And we loved that place too. That's where a lot of locals would hang out. When we were at the Hilton Beach, we were the only ones there, because the hotel guests didn't use it. They were always at the pool or at the real beach. And so we were pretty much alone there. So that was fun. And but really during the day, the only thing there really was really fun for me to do was to go to the beach, and I did it every single day. And you always knew that the clouds would roll in the afternoon. They came in every afternoon, so you had a limited time that you could go out and be on the beach and be getting full sun. And being a dumb teenager, nothing was more important than getting more and more sun and
Or tan?
getting a better tan. And so we spend a lot of time at the beach.
Now, do you have a certain experience that's the most memorable that you had while you were
One
living there?
single experience. Probably the thing that stands out the most, um, but it was a repeated experience, was going to the Kona Inn, because we did that a lot. And we really had a fun friend group that was all from Salt Lake. And all the boys had gone to East High. And it was just a fun time. And as far as any individual experiences, there's definitely one. And one day I was working at the camera shop, and this young man walked in that was really cute. And he asked me to go out with him. And I also had noticed that there was a Navy ship that was just off the shore. And he told me that he was actually the son of the captain of the ship, and they were on what they called a dependence cruise, where the people that were working on the ship could bring on their families to just cruise around the islands a little bit. I can't remember this kid's name, but his dad was the captain of the ship, and it was a naval ship, and I got invited by him to go out and have dinner with the captain at the captain's table on that ship, and that was crazy. Yeah, I mean that was something else because I remember they would send out a launch to pick us up off the pier or to pick me up off the pier, and he was there and got on that boat, and then when we got back to the ship and we were getting off the launch and getting onto the ship, um, all of the men there in uniform stood at attention and saluted because the son and I were coming on as guests of the captain. So that was really, really cool. And I can still remember the little dining room on the ship where we ate, and then just touring around and looking at the ship and all the innards of the ship, and that was really something else. And the thing that was also kind of cool, but didn't work out well, was the captain, his father, the kid's father, had invited me to cruise to another island with him and to be able to spend a day out on the water and whatever. And I remember it was a Sunday and I was scheduled to work at Jim Joe's. And when I tried to get somebody to work for me, the other girl that worked there wouldn't work for me. And so I called Joanne and told her what was going on and asked her, please, is there some way I could be off? And she said, there really wasn't. They would have to close the shop. And so I didn't go. And it was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. And at that young life, young time of life. But looking back on it, on one hand, I regret it because it would have been so much fun. On the other hand, it showed some character. And so I kind of feel good about making the right decision. And Joanne felt really good about me making the right decision and gave me a raise, and so that was kind of cool. But that night of going out to dinner out on the ship was really cool.
You've been back since then. What would you say are the biggest changes? You've been back to your house, right?
Yeah, you should see the house now. The house is beautiful. Somebody who's rich, obviously rich, has bought it and turned it into a beautiful place. It's much better looking than when we lived there. The whole road going up the mountain looks better because so many people have come in and moved in and bought up the old houses and made them a lot more beautiful. And that's a big difference. But everything else has changed. And
So
so
it's a
it,
nostalgia thing.
yeah. But the thing that, is etched in my brain forever is the seawall that we would walk along that was just made out of lava rock. And I'm just talking about right in Kona. I'm not talking about any other parts of the island, but right in Kona, it was just so amazing. The pier where people would go out deep sea fishing, and Kona is well known for the deep sea fishing and the big catches there. And as a matter of fact, my dad caught a great big marlin there that he brought it actually home stuffed and had it hanging on his wall for the rest of his life. And now it's hanging in my nephew's house. So it's pretty cool. But those things are a lot the same. But other than that, everything's been torn down and rebuilt. So a little disappointing, but it's time, and things improve, and time marches on.
If you could go back and visit your younger self in Kona between 19 and 21, what advice would you give her?
That's a good question because I had such a great time while I was in Kona. I don't have a lot of regrets. And so I think if I would give myself some good advice, it would be to start out by lightening up and not worrying about having more money to spend, and work a little bit less, spend more time with the really good people that I met and learn more from them, and be able to take all that to heart. The whole lifestyle in Hawaii is so different from what we live on a day to day here on the mainland. And I mean, every state is different, but in Hawaii, the whole atmosphere is more laid back, and people take seriously the things they need to take seriously, but they also know how to be more relaxed about a lot of things. Money wasn't nearly as important to the local folks. And there was always that what we call the aloha spirit of real tenderness and love between people. And it was just such a good, peaceful, genuine feeling. And I just wish I would have taken more advantage of that and spent more time soaking that up and keeping that as a memory. And so that would probably might be the one thing I would suggest doing, is to spend more time doing the things that are more memorable other than just working.